Um, I'd like to thank BHP for this meeting, this gathering, and what I'd like to talk about is with respect to correspondent banking relationship between Iran and international banks. Initially, I'd like to say that Iran is a country that really should not be overlooked by world community or excluded from global affairs. With her educated, intelligent, hardworking, and diverse population, its strategic location, abundance of natural resources, Iran could at least marginally contribute towards improvement of the world economy, and I believe materially to the economies and politics of Southwest Asia, particularly the Middle East region. There are supposed to be, hopefully, a number of, firstly, I'll talk about some economic indicators for Iran, and then later about banking, and I'll continue with the last point with respect to correspondent banking relationship. As you can see from the figures, GDP of Iran based on PPP, Iran is 18th largest economy in the world, and based on nominal prices, 29th. External debt of Iran is almost nothing, it's 5 billion. Domestic debt, it's in local currency about 135 billion. Together, as a percentage of GDP, Iran's debt is less than 35%, which is compared to many countries of similar size is exceptional, particularly with respect to foreign debt. Case of Turkey, for instance, close by neighbor of Iran, its foreign debt is 420 billion, and its economy, which historically used to be very close to Iran's, is now about 1.7 times size of Iranian economy. If we were to look at some of the other figures with respect to imports, as you can see, sharp drop in import and export. Export of oil has substantially has reduced over the past 2 years, has come down to quite materially when you see from something like 120 billion to close to 27, 28 billion at the present time. If we move to the next government budget, you can see the size of oil revenue in the Iranian economy in government budget. It's about 20%, no more than that. And you can see it at around, I guess, you can see that around 19% here at the bottom here. That's current budget. You can see the deficit is about 16 billion equivalent dollars. And then the government in revenue from oil is no more than 19% of the budget. This is what is an important chart. And the figures are for proven oil reserve of Iran, as well as its converted natural gas into equivalent in barrels of oil. If you combine the two, Iran is the largest holder of oil and gas in the world. If you can see, this is based on BP's latest end of 2015 figures. Natural gas of Iran, proven size of it is 34 trillion cubic meters. And the next one is Russia with 32.6. Converting that into oil equivalent, billions of barrels of oil is 213 for Iran, for a total of 371 billion barrels of oil. And the next one is Venezuela with something like 318, together is, 333, and then it's Saudi Arabia, 308, 318, and I guess Russian Federation is 308. So with 371 billion barrels of oil proven reserves, Iran is the largest. And if we convert that into wealth based on $30, $35, or $40 a barrel, you can see it's, as a comparison, U.S. GDP at the present time is somewhere around 19 trillion, and Iranian wealth sitting on the ground is almost 3/4 of that. It's $13 trillion, which is quite important to be noticed that although oil is not really much in demand these days, but in the long term, natural gas, which is the lion's share of our reserves, proven reserves, there is certainly demand for it. And as previous speakers mentioned, there is quite a bit of potential for domestic growth utilizing the natural gas. In this table, aggregate balance sheet of, I'm looking at the banking sector in Iran. You can see the aggregate balance sheet of all banks. As you can see, there are some major problems here. Total earning assets of the banks is somewhere around 42%. If you look at the asset side of the balance sheet, we have something like 41.5% is earning loans and credits to the private sector, which is those both are non-public sector, as you can see, 41.5%. Just comparing that with the deposit from non-public sector, which is liability or cost-bearing liabilities to the banks, is 55%. Plus what is due to central bank, when you add the two together, you have somewhere around 20% more in cost-bearing liabilities as opposed to interest earning or revenue earning assets, which is quite major. The other points that should be noted, I guess, for the financial statements, as you can see for the banks, aggregate for all banks, 32%, 31.6% of the assets are other assets, which essentially means assets that either are invested, equity investment by many of the banks, and or accrued interest and not received. Again, another non-interest earning assets for the banks, which is quite costly. The other point, at the bottom of the table, you can see the past dues, which is quite substantial. The real one, I'm told, in fact, is even higher than what you see here. These are the stated and reported figures of around 12% of the total loans outstanding by or paid by the banks. Almost the same amount is in form of equity investment, which I will get to that later on with Basel committees, Basel Accord, third Basel Accord, Basel III, that effectively equity investment by banks should be set off against paid-in capital of the banks, which if you bring that into the picture, the seriousness of the difficulty of our banks will become very obvious. We have to do something and it has already been started in Iran, to look at the problem of the banking industry, whether it has to be, restructuring, a new injection of capital, merger among banks. So there are a number of things that on the table right now in Iran and is being looked at. One important, I'll go a little bit faster here. You can see what has happened is one of the greatest achievements of the present government has been reducing inflation. They have been quite successful. The rate of inflation is down to around 11% for average for last Iranian year, and point to point, the last figure was about 7.4% point to point. So the achievement is quite substantial. Unfortunately, we see the liquidity has increased over the last 2 months of the year, Persian year, ending March 20th. We've seen the liquidity to increase quite sharply. This will, in the past, what we have seen, roughly around middle of summer, we will see inflation if nothing is done about it. If I have some time later on, I will come back to this. The problem is, actually, as you can see, the real rate of interest, meaning the rate that banks are paying on deposits versus inflation rate, is better than 12%, which is quite unusual. Historically, has never been the case until recently. And by that, I mean, when inflation has come down as fast as it has, you would expect that the rate that banks pay on deposits or the rates that they expect to receive from their borrowers to work accordingly and come down. They should have come down by now. But unfortunately, because Iran is essentially what is called as bank-dominated economy, which the only provider of debt fund in Iranian economy is banking system. And since the banks are single providers, the demand for debt is there, and the bank essentially have to charge as much as they can in order to gather deposits. They are competing with one another, and the rates are staying pretty much high. And the rate that they are charging to corporate clients is substantially higher than what it should be if it followed just the inflation. I think the real problem is the world has changed and we have fallen behind. We have to initiate, and we're working very hard to get the debt market, capital market, essentially developed in Iran as an alternative to bank lending, particularly for corporate clients, private sector. One important point I have to mention, that in order to sort of get all the debt of the government put it together and present it properly, it was offered that government debt to be, rather than borrowing from the banks or past dues to contractors and you name it, the government should really issue debt formally as opposed to just leaving the debt past due. Finally, we got that through, and the government proposed it. Unfortunately, the parliament rejected this section. We were supposed to have something like $9 billion, equivalent of it in reals, of course, issued by the government, but the parliament turned it down. I'll use that when we are talking about US sanctions and difference between administration and Congress later on. This brings me really to the point that I want to get to, is the JCPOA. There is, of course, from everybody, all of us, we know there is two parties to in every agreement. I believe all the governments on the other side of JCPOA to Iran, including the US administration, they have certainly done what they were supposed to. And obviously, Iran did its part. On January 16, when IAEA issued that letter, Iran had fulfilled all the commitments it had undertaken. The US sanctions, there are two parts to it. One is the primary sanctions, and of course the secondary sanctions. The primary sanctions remain and will not be lifted for the time being. Most of them, if you compare congressional sanctions versus executive orders, many of the primary sanctions are congressionals, and those, for the time being, will remain. Secondary sanctions, most of them which were related to nuclear program of Iran, have already been lifted. And as it was discussed, the US administration and a number of officers from the administration have supported the idea of working with Iran. So if that is the case, and all the governments are for it, why banks from other countries which were subject to secondary sanctions, and those are lifted, why aren't they working with Iran? There are two areas here. One is the dollar transactions, which was discussed here. If you look at the background here, dollar transactions for Iranians were initially sanctioned by the then President Clinton in 1995. This presidential order was lifted, or I'm sorry, before that, the presidential order was turned into law by Senator D'Amato of New York in 1996. However, due to the situation in the oil market, oil export of Iraq was not in those days available, and Iran was playing a major role with about 2.5 to 2.8 million barrels of oil supplying to the world market. So with Congress agreeing to look the other way, with a presidential order, revenue from export of Iranian oil in dollars was allowed to go through New York clearing banks by non-Iranian and non-American banks. And this was going on for a number of years. Iranian oil revenue would go through New York clearing banks, dollar would go, and euros, Swiss francs, and British pounds, etc., would come out. Then This exemption was lifted in 2008. So in order to put pressure on Iran to get the nuclear program, agreement, that and Iraq in the meantime was in the market. 2.5, 3 million barrels of oil was exporting daily. So the sanction, that exemption was lifted. Many of the international banks continued assuming that U.S. Treasury will not come after them. They started, and they were charging Iran quite dearly. You know, the banks that were penalized, the figures that they were charging Iran for converting the dollars into euros and the like were quite higher than the normal banking rates. Ultimately, of course...
Parviz, I think we need to finish pretty quickly because we are way over time, and I don't want to deprive Ali of his
about 5 minutes. Yeah. Okay, I'll try. But the point is here, what I'm trying to get at is one of the reasons is the dollar transactions and the penalty. Many of the major banks talk about because we have been penalized in the past. The reason for that they did not follow the regulations. They did not follow the law. It wasn't Iran, it was they themselves. They knew it was against US law, and they did what they did. And this is one point. Let me go straight to the end. Snapback has already been discussed. It's very unlikely when considering the committee that has to make a decision if Iran is genuine, and as it was, Iran willingly has gone through this process. It never wanted to really build nuclear weapons. So based on that, the chances are that the snapback is not a major problem. Let me get to 2 points, which is another, what international banks talk about is FATF, which is Financial Action Task Force.
I think honestly, we have to keep those
I have 2 minutes.
Well, I think it was meant for Ali Ashraf as
well.
No,
he has 20 minutes of his own. That's what I was promised, Mr. Aghili, just sitting back there.
Go for it.
Let me finish it.
Okay.
What I have to tell you is that FATF, Financial Action Task Force, consisting of 2, anti-money laundering, as well as CFT, which is combating financing of terrorism. Most of the banks who question working with Iran, that Iran still is on the list of CFT. Anti-money laundering has become a law and has been a law in Iran for more than 3 years. There is no problem with it. The banks are following it strictly per terms of what any other bank anywhere in the world follows it. The other point is CFT, which is combating financing of terrorism. Almost 10 days or 15 days after the latest CFT circular came out, which was on February 19th of 2016, on March 3rd, the CFT law was approved in Iran, and the banks are slowly, but all of them are following it. Let me finish by a couple of points. We have to really, our banking system needs to make a lot of changes: transparency, corporate governance, Basel committees, and many other things that we have to do. Last point being IFRS, that we have to implement those in order to have international standards. I believe that within the next 3-4 months, we will see a lot of changes. We will see more and more banks being able to work with international banks. And 4 seconds, thank you very much.
Parviz, thank you very much indeed. I'm sorry to have cut you short because you were being very eloquent. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And I absolutely agree with you about the need to expand it, to have a proper capital market. You're quite right.
That has to happen. Yeah.
A very good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ali Ashraf Afkhami, very simple, AAA. You remember my name always. Well, although, the rating, in Iran has not been in place right now, but some of the banks has received, the ratings, and my bank is BB. Anyway, but myself is AAA. That's much better. Yeah. Well, anyway, I would like to, actually I have 8 slides, but definitely I want just to skip several of them and just show you some of, and focus on some items. You have heard a lot of figures about, the oil and gas capacities, potential reserves, about the mining sectors, and previous speakers they have talked about. So I don't want really to take much of your time. Just as you see here, just very brief important events since the victory of the Iranian revolution, especially focused on the sanctions, which started in 1979 and then 2006 and 2012 and 2015. Several sanctions has been put in force to Iranian economy and also Iranian people. But fortunately, we had this pivotal turning point of 16 January, which today is 110 days after this sanction was actually lifted, which was from the. So I don't want really to take your time with these figures. Definitely, this statistics you can enjoy. It would be in the forum website, and I would like to just show you that only in the stock market that over 30% of the stocks are in the sector of petrochemical and refineries. That is oil and gas anyway. In the banking sector, always the market share is always 12%. With the investments, which is also in the financial sector, that goes almost over 20%, so that over 50% would be oil and gas and banking sector. So the rest is other industries. The most outcomes of the, this deal with the 5+1 with Iran, you will definitely agree with me that it created too much hope in Iran and also in global community. And that really is the drive for making more business, thriving economy of the country. And after reconnecting to the SWIFT system, now we in the banks are more comfortable doing the business in a very transparent way and more efficient, cheaper, and also faster and safer, definitely. And we expect having more access to our foreign assets. We have heard that a lot of money has been freezed during the sanctions. This partially now is unfreezed, and in my subsidiary EIH, which is Europe-Iranisch Handelsbank in Hamburg, actually they have the access to their money. So this is unfreezed, and now we have our money over there. And to give you some good news, not talking about the very much difficulties, but always better to have a positive energy to the audiences as well. During the past 110 days, actually, over 630 million euro LCs was actually advised by the EIH through EIH, well, the Iranian banks. That means that only single bank in Germany, which was quite active in this period of time, they have a very good performance. And transfer of the monies also by the EIH from the Iranian banks also to other European banks was during these past 110 days over 1 billion euro. That means that now it is getting better and better, and we have a better situation in the future. The exports of the oil you have seen here. just one thing I want to make a comment on what Mr. Navid from Denton mentioned, that Iranians are in love with signing the MOU. Well, I should add that we are in love to make it happen again as well. Not only I'm in love with signing the MOU. We are doing, we are working very hard to make the things happen and also realize what would be our dreams. That means that even you can see, by the oil exports from 1 million barrel per day, this has been increased to over 2 million. This is not, just the wish. It is what has really happened within the past almost more than 3 months. One thing which is very, very important, is really to stick, to this policy of the government for single-digit inflation rate, which is now targeted by the government, and also the central bank is very much working on this policy. Hopefully, we are willing that could be achieved, because during the past 2.5 years, from 45 to 11% drop, it's really a very, very radical and dramatic change on the inflation. So that means, we are going to materialize what we are saying and what we are doing, in Iran. Also, from this, recession, which we are faced, especially because of the sanctions, now it's getting better, and now definitely gradual exit from the stagnant situation we will be witnessed. We have a very diverse economy comparing with our neighboring countries, which are very much dependent on oil and gas. Iran has a very diversified economy, and that's very, very good to know that we, as in a position to have actually a very good position to be a bridge between Middle East and also the Europe and also rest of the world. We have actually very good balanced relationship between employers and employees in Iran. This might be interesting for you, that the unions which you have in Europe, and you are facing with some strikes. Last week I was in Hanover, and to get to a conference, it was very difficult to get there, but anyway I made it. But so in Iran, we have less strikes comparing with the European community. I skip, the policies of the governments, which only mention one of them, which is very important. Now, the customs regulation has been, a very good system in place within the past 2 years, and the electronic system has been operational, and that really makes everything transparent and more, not the people be involved on the transaction, also about the bureaucratic issues, and that's much better system, especially for the foreign investors coming to Iran. We have a very, good, free zones all over Iran, which has been scattered, especially, in the south part of Iran, Kish Island, Qeshm Island, and Chabahar, and Jask, and 2 is in north part of Iran, Anzali, and also Aras. We have several special economic zones. The major and important one is the Asaluye in Bushehr, which is the hub for the petrochemical complexes. And we are exporting from that single free zone over 17 billion euro each year. That means that we have done a lot on that place. A potential, actually, volume of the investments and the big picture I want to give you, especially considering the reconstruction projects, huge reconstruction projects around Iran in neighboring countries. Also in Iran, that really comes to over 100 billion euro a year, and that's really open for the business, for the investors. We are also facing with several challenges, especially, the country risk and the companies rating. That is very, very important that to be rated, and we have started in the banking system. Several banks now, they have their ratings, not from the big names like Fitch, Moody's, and S&P, but anyway, we have done it through another organization. We are always facing with these questions that, the portfolio of the risks. It is political risk, reputational risk, technology, inflation, exchange rate, which in my opinion, exchange rate would be one of the major issues for the future of Iran. But the target of having one exchange rate is very, very important to really mitigate, the risk of this one as well. What we do in the bank, we do have sort of, I call it, if you look at it, we call it a heat map. So for each company, we conduct, sort of a study for risk assessments. So maybe 270 different parameters we are looking for every company that we have to enter to a business with them, and part of that KYC we are conducting, for doing the business. That means we are doing the business very professional way, and hopefully we can cope with these difficulties which you are concerned about, especially maybe the ECA coverage as well, which is very, very important to know that, the major ECAs now, they have agreed and settled even the pending issues. A limited number of the countries is just, maybe in the final stage, like Germany, for example, the Hermes. I hope that we can make it very soon. And also, snapback, these sort of things you have mentioned. Dr. Aghili also explained about what we are going to do to update the banking standards. About the Basel III, corporate governance, compliance, AML, CFT, and several other things, which is very, very important. And now, actually, at least I know that in several banks, including my bank, we do have, these compliance officers in place, the AML, anti-money laundering systems in place, and they're really operational. And now we are very much actually not very much worried, because we can, as a team, we can really determined enough to meet and cope with this sort of challenges. Well, just I want to skip this, then you can later on refer to. I think it's finished, yeah? But, yeah, maybe just I'm emphasizing that my bank is a state-owned bank, but over 99% of its facilities goes to private sector. This is very, very important that we are doing the project financing and also different tools which you can later on refer to. About the EIH, I gave you, some of the numbers, the positive numbers, which is now very operational. And the SMEs in Iran also very much actually active. We are active on that sector. Very much concerned about the social responsibilities. We have also financed several hospitals, including one in Tehran, which is the state-of-the-art of the neuroscience institute, and also surgery facilities. That will be in operation maybe in 2 years' time, but it is in construction. The sample of the things, we have conducted, Kavian petrochemical plant, they're all in private sectors. The ethylene, the largest ethylene cracker, the petrochemical. And
they'll all be on your website.
Yes, they are. Yeah. But
I think we have to
want
stop
to maybe another 2 minutes.
Well, I tell you what, there was confusion about the clock, because Parviz thought that all the time was for him, and neither I nor Ali had realized that that it was supposed to be divided between the two of you. So we are now actually 30 minutes behind schedule.
30 minutes.
And I know that there's another session coming up with Peggy, and then there will be a workshop, and then there will be lunch, and we don't want all these poor people
maybe
to
starve. They don't like to have the lunch, maybe.
No, well.
They want to enjoy our
I think what we should do is take one question.
Okay.
All right? Ali, you've done a fantastic job. Thank you very much. And you have been shortchanged, because you're at 14 minutes and 8 seconds. And I know... we have to stop. I know that bargaining is a great Middle Eastern tradition, and you are very, very good at it. Let us take one question. Is there a single question? There is not a single question.
That's true.
So I'm going to ask one single question to both of you. It seems to me that the bank-dominated economy is not actually all that helpful. So how do you actually get a proper capital market?
Well,
you have 30 seconds to answer this, and then 30 seconds.
Okay, I start, because it's... I want to use this time. Actually, now we are very much...
yes, here we are, Sukuk and convertible bonds. You have the answer.
Yeah. Actually, we have actually, this knowledge about the issuing, different type of the bonds. especially Islamic bonds, which is one
Yeah.
is called sukuk. And we have done, for some projects, but real sukuk, but for currency also that could be possible and could be actually issued in the international market. So we are quite open for that.
Thank you.
For domestic market, it's quite useful. We have been using it, and so it will be a formalized approach now. Proper rates in the market, discounts, and et cetera. It's a matter of time for it to happen.
Okay. Well, I have been very rude to both gentlemen, but I hope you will not be, that you give them a great round of applause. Thank you very, very much.